Good afternoon, beautiful people. Welcome to another episode of Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum. I am in the presence of a very special guest. His name is Gerard Keubeung, and he is a professor and a personal friend of mine. He's an assistant professor at McDaniel College in Westminster, Maryland, and he got his PhD at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville in French in 2018. We're going to talk some about his dissertation. Previous to that, he got his master's degree in francophone studies at the University of Oregon in Eugene. And prior to that, he has a master's degree. He has two master's degrees, one at the University of Yaoundé in Cameroon, the country that he's from. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, start off the conversation about Cameroon and transition over to other affairs. But Gerard, I just want to say thanks for accepting that invitation and welcome to the show. I can't wait to talk to you.
Thank you, Kiko. I'm the one who is honored.
Oh yes, don't be so humble. No, I'm honored too. I really am excited. It's been a while since we've talked to each other, but we've always kind of kept in touch with each other. And this is going to be a great conversation. I know it is. And you've been one of many professors that's been willing to join the show and share just kind of into our world and insight into the professor world and the stuff that we go through and the struggles and the ups and the downs. And hopefully the audience can kind of get that connection between the professional class, which is us, versus people who may not have those same ties to academia. But I think everyone appreciates it. And I want to start out by asking you, for audience members who may not know a lot about just the continent of Africa, you're from Cameroon. Tell people as far as where's Cameroon from, and maybe it's something about the culture of Cameroon or the cultures of Cameroon, the languages spoken, and where you're from personally.
Okay, Cameroon, Kiko, I will say Cameroon. We used to call Cameroon the Africa, because everything that you find in Africa, you can find it in Cameroon. It's African in miniature. That's how we call it. Because also because Cameroon is right in the middle of Africa, in what is called now the Guinea Gulf, the Gulf of Guinea, that's how we say it in French. And Cameroon, the particularity of Cameroon is that Cameroon was colonized by many countries, by many superpowers. We first have the Portuguese, and then we have the Spanish, and later, after the Berlin Conference that took place from 1884 to 1885, Germany took control of Cameroon, Germany. And it stayed that way until 1916, after Germany lost the First World War. And then we become French and British, because France and Great Britain took control of Africa, of Cameroon. And we have in Cameroon, we have 10 regions, and 8 of those regions were in the French part. It means that they speak French. And 2 regions were the property of Great Britain. Those are the those are the part of my country where people speak English. And we will come back to that later. But those parts in my country, right now, they are trying to build their own country. They want secession because they think that they are marginalized. Mm-hmm. But before we come into that, that's how I can present Cameroon. And what is also important to say is that Cameroon was independent on January 1st, 1960. And from that time until now, we only have 2 presidents. 2 presidents. Yes. And we are a democracy. I'm laughing. You understand what I mean?
And yeah, that's very different from our system in the States.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And we have more than 270 languages. And what else to say?
And
We,
I do have a question about that. Before you mentioned all these nationalities, I did not know anything about that. About the I knew some about the two provinces with English and then the eight with French, but I didn't know anything about just the transfers of power between. You mentioned the Portuguese, the Spanish, the German. I did not know that there was so much colonization going on in Cameroon. Um, what what cultures were there before all the colonization occurred? Before the Europeans were there? Um, I'm assuming that that's part of the 270 different languages you said in the country.
yes, absolutely. We have people were living there before the Portuguese or the Spanish, and all these small kingdom are still there. But it's also important to say that people who live there right now, some of them come from Ethiopia, and some come from the west part of Africa, from Ghana or from Senegal, and from Mali. For example, our first president, we used to say that he has some parents in Mali. Then people come from all these parts in the Africa, and then they found they stop in Cameroon. Then we people come from all over the north of Africa, and then they stop there. And you also know that in Cameroon we have the north part of Cameroon is the it's like a desert. Yeah, we have people who live there. It's almost like a desert. And in the south, we have the forest. You see that
Mm.
people could not go beyond the forest. That's why we have some other people there. They're stuck there, if you can say that.
Mhm.
And but the Portuguese, the heritage we have from the Portuguese is that they are the first to give us the name Cameroon, because when they arrive in Douala, which is the big city, the economic capital, they found that we had so many, how to call that? Um, so many shrimp there, shrimp. And they called the place Rio dos Camaroes.
Mhm.
It means a river full of shrimp. And
Mhm.
then the Spanish come later, and they call the same river in Spanish, Rio dos Camarones. I'm sure that
Mhm.
you understand that better.
Yeah, claro.
Yes, that's where the name Cameroon come. And then from Camerones, and then the German, they call it Cameroon with K.
Mm.
Cameroon with K. And later we have Cameroon in French and English with small c. But still, Cameroon still call Cameroon with K by some nationalists, because
Right.
Cameroon with K was really huge. And some part of the territory went to Nigeria, some other part went to Chad and to the Central African Republic. It was really huge country, and I can say that we lost almost a half after the German lost the First World War.
Mm. Is that the reason why there's the K in the Congo?
Mm, no, Congo is different. Congo is little bit is is a little bit far from us, because you need to know that we have two Congo, right? We have
Mhm.
Congo with Brazzaville as a capital,
Mhm.
which is really our neighbor. And on the other side of the Congo River, we have the DRC, Congo.
Mhm.
Yes. Then can, we are not, Cameroon is not called Congo. Congo can be the name of a huge territory that was in the middle of Africa, from the Congo with Brazzaville as capital, and
Mhm.
and all these countries that is below the equator. I can say that.
So Kinshasa will be the capital of the Democratic Republic of
Yes,
Congo.
Kinshasa is the capital of Democratic Republic of Congo, called previously called Zaire. I hope that
Zaire.
it was Zaire. Okay.
Yeah, I think this is important to sort of get these because there's a sense, at least in the United States, I don't know how it is in Africa, but the people that I encounter don't have a great sense of geography in the United States, and I think that's the reason why um, these different communication networks can manipulate the people because they understand that we don't have a good grasp of geography and culture and stuff, and so that's why I think it's important just to have that base to know where places are because we don't hear about Cameroon a lot in the news, if at all, here in the United States. You know how we are here. We have a very Eurocentric, Western Europeanized media. All the information we get is from that perspective, and I don't ever hear about Cameroon. Like I did a Google search just to see what would come up with Cameroon the other day. Very little information came up. I mean, and the information that does come up is always the catastrophe-driven type of headlines, which is very prevalent in the United States. It's almost like life happens here, but outside of this bubble we live in, it's only disasters, catastrophes. They don't consider that there are actual people living in those places. They have their own way of living and their own mindsets and perspectives. And that's kind of why I want to bring on the forum is to show that it shouldn't be focused. You have to look outside of your zip code. You have to look outside of your neighborhood. You have to look at other places, and maybe you can learn more, and you can grow your community better because you have a better understanding of how the world functions. Like we're really in it together, and I don't think that that's promoted enough. Togetherness is not promoted enough. It's always division sells, separation sells, and people coming together is not something that um, the people who make money off of that want to see. They don't want to see people come together because that would mean we would actually have to solve some of the problems that we confront.
Yes.
But
I,
yeah.
if I may say, people don't know a lot about Cameroon here in US because first, we speak mainly French there.
Mm-hmm.
If you talk about Africa here, people know about Nigeria. Nigeria, maybe Kenya because of Obama, of course, and also because these countries speak French, speak English. And it's just recently that people from Cameroon start to immigrate to the US. Maybe before we had some people from the English part, from the Anglophone part, who immigrate here. But France and especially Paris was the paradise of people in Cameroon.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the colonial relationship. That's why we
Which I'm sure we're going to talk about that relationship. That has,
absolutely.
man, basically deals with your dissertation and the kind of like your focus between colonized peoples in Africa and then this relationship that France has over the continent, really. There are other European powers, but France is kind of the first one that I think of when we talk about imperialism spreading across Africa. But to your point, even about Nigeria, when people think of Nigeria here, when I was a kid, whenever I thought of Nigeria, the news always connected that with corruption and in Nigeria, the money schemes, the Ponzi schemes, and the email schemes, people trying to get your bank account information and steal your money. So even that connotation here, when people hear of Nigeria, is not a positive connotation. It's always something that's negative. And I think it's important for people to realize this nationalism, fervor of nationalism, falls into that when people are very nationalistic. It's a mindset where it's my space is so special, but your space is something else. And that's why I try to avoid that type of stuff because I think it can be really dangerous when you start comparing your space to somebody else's and then everybody's proud of their country, whatever. I mean, that's not something to be like, oh, this is the best place ever. If you go around the world, most people love where they're from. Believe it or not, I know people don't believe that. Everyone wants to come to the United States, though. Gerard. That's what they always say. Everyone wants to come here, but that's not necessarily true. I mean, in this situation, in Cameroon, maybe Cameroonians want to go to France. Maybe from that perspective, France is, sort of serves the same purpose as the United States when you
Yes,
talk about these global struggles and powers.
yes. But not
Mhm.
anymore in France.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Okay, so we learned a little bit about your about the culture of Cameroon and stuff. And I want to kind of get your vantage point as far as cultural intricacies that may be present in Cameroon and the rest of Africa. Because I bring this up because during the World Cup, and I don't know if you watched the World Cup of football. Did you watch it?
Of course.
Okay, did you hear about all the chatter between Morocco? Because people on the Moroccan team made the comments about how this is for the Arab world and the Middle East. And a lot of people didn't, a lot of the Black Africans that I saw on social media was so upset because they portrayed that as Morocco wants to separate itself from the Black Africans and they want to be represented by the Arab world exclusively and the rest of the Middle East and the Near East and Asia. Um, is that a real thing? Is there a tension between Arab cultures in Africa and Black Africans, or is this something that is there a tension but both sides are kind of marginalized in different ways?
Hmm. Okay, I will not talk about that as a scholar because I haven't looked through it as a scholar. But I will talk about it like someone who watch news and who at a certain point experience that through some friends or some people that I know. And to to go back to the World Cup is just recent. Okay, you know, before the World Cup, we organized the African Cup of Nations in
Mm-hmm.
Cameroon. It was in 2021. 2021, yes. And um, the Moroccan, the Morocco team, when they they came in Cameroon with their water, with their food, with a plane full of everything. They didn't use anything in Cameroon. Yes,
Really?
that was yeah, yes. They they came with the and also the hotel that was allowed to the team, they changed it at the when they arrived, and I think they were penalized by the African Soccer Confederation.
Mm-hmm.
From that point of view, you can understand. Uh, maybe okay, no, you can understand, but from that point of view, you see that they distance themselves from not from the Cameroonian, but from the sub-Saharan Africa.
Mm.
And also we had after before the World Cup, right before the World Cup, because that was that was Morocco, right after the World Cup, because we get our qualification as Cameroon. Cameroonian team got his qualification in Algeria. Algerian team came in Cameroon, they beat us, and we had to go back in Algeria and play the last match to get the qualification. And we beat Algeria there, and they start to say that, they begin to say that we corrupt, we corrupt the referee, and they do that, and they begin to insult Samuel Eto'o, and
Mm.
and from that time, I think the Algerian team manager, start to say that, and that's what he said. When we go to Africa, it always like this. When they come here, you see, you understand what he said?
So,
When they go to Africa,
mm-hmm.
always like this.
So they're automatically saying that they're not a part of Africa.
Absolutely,
Oh, I got you. So
absolutely.
so that's already the perspective embedded in. They're already saying, so
Yes.
Africa means, so if you codify that, so they're saying that the sub-Saharan Africans are the Africans.
No, Africa means people, African are black. That's how it means.
Right,
If
right.
I have to
I
speak it,
understand that. I understand
yes,
that, but from their perspective, they're making a distinction between people that look like you versus them.
yes. And also we have also some events that you can take into account. Uh, you know that in Libya there's no state there. And I'm sure that you heard what happened in Libya last year or the year before about the African who were selling there as a slave. I don't know if you
I
heard
haven't
about that.
followed
It
that a
was on
whole lot.
CNN. It was on CNN because some reporter from CNN they 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 do some research about that, and it went in prime time on, I think it was on Don Lemon TV show. I remember that time.
Oh, that's the reason why I didn't watch it, because I don't watch CNN.
Yeah,
That's
but it
what
was interesting that time because
okay.
they went there, and I remember in Cameroon we had people who come back from Libya and describe how they was sold there like a slave. That's what is
Wow.
happening. It's still happening. And
Mm,
right now, I'm talking right now, in Tunisia, people
mm,
are they are going back to their country. And I read this morning that the leader of the of a student from Ivory Coast was killed.
mm,
Why? Because they are black. Because if I can say that because you're yours, we can say that. Yes.
mm-hmm.
And to make it short, when I was kid, we used to divide Africa in Black Africa and White Africa.
Mm,
That's how we were taught in
mm-hmm.
elementary school. But when I grew up in high school, we didn't have to use those terms. But
Wow.
we had to say Afrique blanche, the White Africa, and and Black Africa. And those
Wow.
people from the Maghreb, from the North Africa, Morocco, Algeria,
Tunisia.
Tunisia, no, they are not considered themselves as African.
Mm,
Because there they are more developed, they have more infrastructure, and people from sub-Saharan Africa go there to have some job, to have jobs, to work, to have better opportunity. And
mm,
that's how I can describe it. Yes, there's an issue between Arab Arab from North Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, as I will call Black Africa.
and just
There,
to get a clarification from the audience, he referred to Semi Eto'o, who is one of the most famous footballers, soccer players, because some of my audience may not even know what a football is.
yes,
But he's one of the most famous Cameroonian soccer
soccer,
players
yes.
in the world. He said soccer, yeah.
So yeah,
No,
because
I'm pretty sure my audience probably knows that I refer to it as football, the real football, not the fake football.
yes, that's how I
The
say it.
real football is soccer. Association football that we call soccer predates American football that we see all the time on television here. But no, that stuff that you brought up just then is pretty eye-opening. I say I don't have anything like that to compare to here. I've heard distant stories. I remember there was a girl that I went to school with when I was in ninth grade in high school, and she's the only person that I know, at least in my generation, that had this experience where she lived in Mississippi, the state below Tennessee, and she described the town she was from, and the person would call the roll, the teacher would, and they would call the student's name and then call them Michael, Black, so and so, Susan, White. Like, so that's the only thing I can think of that kind of relates to what you were saying as far as this, the categorization aspect. But that's pretty interesting. And there's definitely some tension there. It sounds like there's a lot of tension.
Yes. And Kiko, also, all this is related, I will say, to the place of the Black man in the world. It's related to that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they try to collude with Europe or with the Middle East. And you talk about the World Cup. The Moroccan, when they won that game, they say we we thank the Middle East. That is a game. That is a win for the Middle East. And then after he said, next time he said, for Africa, they don't consider themselves like Africa. Not
Mm.
not
Wow, that's really interesting. And you also, it almost seems like this happens a lot. This is part of colonization. It really
yes.
is. And you see this where there's always this intermediary situation where people, there's a higher colonial power, and then you have these satellites that are part of that colonial structure, and they may not have the same economic infrastructure, but they have a colonized mindset that tries to mimic the superpower, which in this case could be France or the Great Britain or the United States or Germany, whatever it is. And you see that with these countries that were colonized directly by those countries, you may not have necessarily the same cultural ties, but there's a mindset that goes back to the colonial. Um, I don't think people take that into consideration. They just see it as just like a sea of, oh, look at all those brown people, all those black people. But there's so many different subsets within those groups of people, and so many different histories that happened that led up to that point.
That's
Um,
true.
Africa is the most diverse place in the world. It's the most diverse continent. Um, as far as languages, Africa is actually, I'm pretty sure it's larger than most land masses. I mean, Africa is a large landmass, and I don't think people consider that because I think there's how many, what, 45 countries in Africa?
55 or 56.
Okay.
Yes, because recently we had the South Sudan. Yes, I think
Yeah.
55 or 56 country. Yes.
I think since we're talking about the subject, it may be a an appropriate time to kind of transition into your dissertation some. I was able to read parts of it. It was in French, and I can read French pretty well. But when you're doing something that's like pretty theoretical, like a dissertation, it's harder to kind of follow. But I want my audience to kind of get, because you got to keep in mind. I mean, the audience may not have this sort of knowledge base, but kind of share with us what your dissertation is about and how your dissertation ties into kind of what we've talked about this first 20 minutes or so.
Okay, and I wanted to say that when you mentioned colonial mind is correct, because when you go back to the French colonial empire, we had that racial hierarchy. We have the white French European, we have in the middle, we have both the Arab and the Asian people from Indochina, and at the bottom we have the black. Then yes, of course, we can link that to the colonial mind. And about my dissertation, the title first, as you may recall, was from native to banlieue dweller, banlieue or banlieusard. Banlieusard is a term in French, an inhabitant of the suburb. Then it was from native to suburb inhabitant,
Mm-hmm.
figures of alterity in the francophone African novels. And I wanted to precise this for your audience, that when I talk about suburbs inhabitant, they need to understand suburbs not as we refer to here in US, because the suburb here in US is supposed to be the place where people who have money, people who have money live. It's not the same thing in France or in the context of my dissertation. The suburb is where we have all the trash, we have all the immigrants, we have all the African descent. That's where they are. They are they are outside of the society. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then I wanted to, in that dissertation, to scrutinize the way francophone African writers critique in their writing the colonial construction of the African subject as other.
Mm-hmm.
And a link of what you just talked about the people from the North Africa is that research encompass three cultural geographical space. I try to take African as a whole. North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and of course, France, because we have people in France who are Africans, the African descent. It's Africa. Then I took all these contexts culturally, geographically, and even the space as a whole. And my innovation in that dissertation was that the study was transhistoric. I go across different historical periods, the colonization period, and then after the colonization, we have the waves of migration and the contemporary period. And all those three periods are their particularities. And I also use an interdisciplinary approach in order to make it more global as possible and to understand what it means, or how the African is perceived in that space.
And
yes.
Where was what time period are we talking about? What's the span of your dissertation within these novels? You did 6 novels?
Yeah, at that time I used 6 novels for the dissertation because I'm working on that now to turn it into a book, to make it into a book. But I used 6 novels. And for the colonial period, the period of colonization before 60, because most of the African country became independent in 1960, 1962 with Algeria. And I used 2 novels. One is from a Cameroonian author, and another one is from an Algerian author. You see why I say that I use African as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And for the period of immigration, I use one Sub-Saharan African from Senegal, and another one from Algeria. And from the last part, I use the author from France. They are French citizens, but with African descent. And I call them African because what they write or their literature is not included in the French literature. That's why I took all these novels and decided to use to describe or to scrutinize, to analyze the way African was perceived, was constructed as other. And I'm sure when you were talking about the soccer, you remember that in 2018, when France won the World Cup the first time, you remember that discussion between I forgot his name, the guy from the Daily Show, the discussion Trevor Noah has with the French ambassador. You remember that?
I don't remember the segment, but I remember there was a lot of discussion about um, the French national team and all the jokes. Honestly, the ridicule because people were basically saying, "Oh, is that a French team or is that an African team?" That
Yeah,
was.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's because at that time I think Trevor Noah said that thank you and congratulations to the Africans, to the French African who won the World Cup. And the French ambassador what and said that he was an insult because it was not the African who won the World Cup. Those players were French, not African. And I remember Trevor Noah was saying that why can you just say French and African? Because the problem is that Trevor Noah criticized the fact that the French ambassador was trying to get rid of the African part of those players. That was the thing.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally get that, and it goes into nationality. It goes into the idea of space and race, cultural intricacies. I had some questions about your dissertation because what was what was a line of thought that you saw between these writers? Was there anything that they had in common? Because you said that there was a one of the writers you dealt with was an African that was French, but African descent, like Black African descent, and then you talked about the Algerian writer and then another African writer, correct?
Yeah,
I don't know if the Cameroonian or
yeah,
what, but
yes.
what was a common thread of struggle that they all seem to have a problem with? What was a common link between those three?
Okay. The fact is that before in 20 2005 in November exactly in November 2005 2005 there were a riot in France, in Paris especially. And the riot started because three French citizens, three kids from African descent died. Two of them died because they were running away from the policemen who thought that they steal something. That's what they said. And those kids were running from the police and they get into a an electric generator and they get electrocuted. And after that, um, Nicolas Sarkozy was at that time. Nicolas Sarkozy is the former French president. He was at that time Ministry of the Interior, and he said he denied the fact that those kids was chased by the policemen. And after that, he said that the kids were the robbers. We had so many contradictions, and because those kids died, people from that area, they start to they start to burn or they start to protest. They start with the protest, and and the policemen threw some gas into a mosque. That's where the riot became very serious, and they start to burn the cars to 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 this. And when they start to burn the car, the police also get into the road, get into the street, and they also we had the confrontation as usual, because what is need to be clear about this is that we are talking about the suburb of France. And what I previously said, that in that suburb of France, we have in majority people from Africa. People from Africa. Why? Because when after the colonization, after the decolonization, people who come, they get stuck there. And before the redesign of the Paris, that was the place where we have so many manufacturers. But because of the crisis, some company left that place and there were nothing there. Okay, you see, like a Detroit, it was like a Detroit. After the crash, the company left that space. That's where those people who didn't get education, who were most of the time the people from Africa who come from the rural part of Africa, they didn't have a job and their kids didn't have anything to do. They were not high school there because they had to go to Paris to go to school. Okay, that's where those people were living, and they start to riot. And because in many of those cities in France, those suburbs were in place. All the suburbs in all the place in France respond to Nicolas Sarkozy and to the official discourse of French by rioting. Then we had a generalization of the rioting, and it's because the French officials said that the rioters they were African and they were boy. When I say boy, you need to understand boy in the sense that the women are those who are maltreated, who stay at home. Okay, because in the colonial period, we have the man and the women. Okay. The man is the one who what's the term? He's a threat to the woman because he got all the power, and because he got all the power, the woman is considered as a second, as you see what is so difficult with
secondary?
It's second, not only secondary. The woman means nothing. That's a perception, and that's why
subordination,
subordinated, and for them, the women place is at the kitchen,
domestic
home. Yes, okay. That's why when they said that the rioters were African, and in this context, there's no separation between the Arab in the black. They are in the same basket. They are in the same basket in contemporary France. They are in the same basket. The rioters were French, were Africans, not French citizens, but Africans. But your audience need to understand that some of those kids, or the parents of some of those kids, were born in France. Many of them, many of their parents. And you can talk, if you talk about them, you see that there's no way you can call them Africans. It's like me. That's the example I use with my student. I'm an immigrant in US. You cannot call my kids here immigrant. And after 2 generations, you cannot call my descendants Africans. They are Americans. That's the same context. Those kids or those rioters were called African. And that's what struck me. And I start to think myself, why? Why why are they called Africans? How come all of those kids are put in the same basket? And I realized that to understand the status, to understand their position, to understand their Frenchness or their Francité, I need to go back to the history and understand how African get linked to the French, to France. And that's why I go back to the colonization period to describe the treatment of Africans during the colonial period, how he was constructed as other, because in the colonial period, during the colonial time, we had in the French Empire, we had the citizen, the European or the French, the white, and we had the subject or the colonized. And after colonization, then we had a wave of migration because they were in Africa, they were in the colony, they were colonized. They were subject there. It's the same thing during the period, during the wave of migration. After 1960, when France decided to go back and find some manpower to come and rebuild France, they go back to Algeria, they go back to Africa. They allow those people to come in France and build France. But what they didn't know at that time is that they will stay there. That's what happened later, and those people, those immigrants who previously were just came to build France and go back to Africa, decided to stay in France. They become immigrants, and they were not seen as a French citizen. They were not perceived as human beings. They were living, I will say, far away from the society, because everything they have to do was just to work. They work from 24/7. That's what they have to do. And that was the immigrant. And right now we have those French citizens who appear to be Black or Arabs, who are still considered as African. And the question, one of the central questions is that if we have people like Nicolas Sarkozy, who is a son of, who is the son of hungry immigrant, who can become president, why can we have the same with people who come from Africa? And that's the problematic of the relationship between France and Africa. And that's basically what I try to describe in that dissertation, and that's what I do.
I commend the work that you do. We have, I think, a lot of convergence and commonality, some of the work we do, because my dissertation, you did an interdisciplinary sort of approach, and I did the same thing because I did it across languages. I had to do Lusophone, Francophone, Hispanophone.
Yes.
So I get the convergences. Haiti's history with the Dominican Republic, even though they're on the same island, but you have the same kind of description that you talked about with the Arab Black African dynamic, in a sort of like the similar situation there, except you had both groups who were Black people, African descendants, but the Haitians were viewed as the dark Blacks and the Dominicans were viewed as the light Blacks. And the protagonist that I was working with actually migrated to the Dominican Republic and, got killed on the Parcel Massacre in 1937, and which was basically a racial genocide. From Haitians that were trying to go over to find work in the Dominican Republic, to find a better living because of the political system there and all the bad economics. That was during the Depression, so there's just so much that goes into what you said. And this whole idea of being visible and not visible, the suburbanite that you're describing is distant from the center of society, which is the white French person. And you're saying that everyone outside of that is not is basically African, like the Arab and the black in this case are both viewed as African, even though in Africa itself, the people who live in Morocco don't see themselves the same way as someone in Senegal or Cameroon, but they're put in the same position in France. You pointed that out really clearly. And I thought about Latin America when you were describing this because a lot of people are deceived by the visuals. And but people are also deceived by what they don't see either. I have friends that are from these areas in Latin America, like Peru and Ecuador, that have large indigenous populations, like Native American populations. And then they say, oh, but there are not many black people in those areas, but there are black people in those areas. Those black people have been invisibilized in those areas. And so when you go to Lima, they're blacks in Peru, but they live outside of the city, like way outside of the city, like in the shanty towns. And
Yeah.
so that's what I was thinking about. The people there that are marginalized is like is different than the United States, even not because here we associate poverty with the city center. The projects and all the housing projects are in the middle of the city, but it's the opposite in Latin America. The shanties are outside of the city. They're not right in the middle where everyone can see it. It's almost the opposite. That's what I was thinking about when you were describing these racial differences, these perceptions of othering. Is really fascinating the type of work that we do, and I totally understand what you were trying to do in your dissertation, and I can't wait to read your book once it becomes a book because I'm confident that you're going to make that into a book, and I can't wait to read it.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes. I will do that. I will try to see someone to translate that because I'm writing in French.
Oh, I don't know if I can do that for you, but,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
yeah.
Yes.
I was thinking about something you said too about these perceptions of differences. I'm curious, just from your standpoint, you're in the States now, and you were telling me before we got on that you're here because you have a job in the university, and if you didn't have that protection in the university, you would be in Cameroon. But I'm curious, just like as your from your vantage point, how has been your I guess treatment in the United States, like since you've been in the United States, you've been here for a while. And what is the perception that you have of Black people here? And what do you feel is the perception that Black people have towards you?
Yes. It's really, it's okay. First, I will say that I'm really, really happy to be among to be African American, because I cannot call myself African American. I will, because it will not describe me best. I'm
Mm-hmm.
an African in America because I cannot understand what it means to be African American. I did not experience slavery. I did not experience the Jim Crow or so other thing. I came from Africa, where I have with the white superstructure, we have the colonial link, and I think it's different. And yesterday I was talking with my student about the difference between an African and a Black African in the US and um, the Black man from the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost what you're asking me, because I will say, when I'm with an African American, I will say honestly, Kiko, that I feel safe, I feel welcome than I'm with an African. It's curious, but that's the truth.
Do you feel safer with Black people in the United States as opposed to Africans like from Africa?
I will say that, and it's not only me. an African is I will say maybe it's in the university area, in the university world, or in the
I
university
got you.
environment, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm always happy. I feel welcome because African American, when he see me, I think he see the experience he had from slavery. He see me like him,
Mm-hmm.
like someone who was marginalized. But when an African see me, we experience colonization together, and colonization was brutal. Not as maybe not as slavery, because honestly, I cannot talk about slavery. I cannot. But colonization was brutal in the sense that colonization break the wholeness of Africans.
Mm-hmm.
For Africans, the white is the perfection.
Mm-hmm.
We need to identify ourselves. And an African in US, he seems to have the idea that we are not, we are so many, and there's no room for all of us. I need to be the one. I need to be the one, and I need to do everything to please the master, and I need to push people, my other African friends out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I can say, and I think it's about. I think that is colonization. And I will tell you that anecdote. I think I don't know if I told you before, but when I was at University of Oregon, when
You did. I remember
I
you
was
telling me. I was waiting for you to tell me this.
yes, I wear my African clothes. I was happy to work on campus with my African clothes, and my Cameroonian friend told me that, guy, what's going on with you? Why are you wearing this? We already know that you're African. Why are you wearing this? I don't know if you understand. It means that an African will come here, want to disappear, or he want to get rid of his African identity.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't want to be seen as African. But in certain way, in certain position, he doesn't want to get identified as African American.
Interesting.
Because in the mind, and I was discussing with someone recently, I was angry, I was upset because it was almost a fight, but he was saying that the guy is in France, and he has his cousin who came here with the lottery, with a green card. And that guy told him that African American are idiots. They're lazy. They don't do anything. They have everything. They have everything, but they don't take advantage of that. And I was telling the guy that you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You don't know what you're talking about. Me as African, when I come in this country, when I came here, I had many chances that African American who live here doesn't have, and I see that with my student here. When I came here as African, I had a scholarship. I had a stipend to study. Many African American doesn't have the opportunity to go to college. But that you cannot understand.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really bizarre. We have all this. It's a mess. You see why I pick some idea here, but it's really a problem. And to make it short, my mentor at Bowdoin told me that Africans, she's from the Caribbean. She told me one day that Africans here in the US are not trustworthy. You cannot rely on them. I don't know if it's because they are immigrant, but they are not, they are not, uh, um, they are not sympathetic about the Black cause because they think that they are Africans, that the fight of African American are not there.
Mm-hmm. I think what you're describing is so important because and my audience is really going to get a lot of I think they're going to have a lot of questions even after this interview is over. But these conversations are needed because I think what is happening is a lot of deflection and reflection. I think that wherever you are in the world and you're Black, whether it's the Caribbean, whether it's Africa, whether it's France, whether it's the United States, we obviously experience colonization, but in very different ways. But I understand what you're describing. Like everything you said, I was like, "Yep, I've seen that before. I've perceived that before." But I've seen the Blacks that I grew up with, and they don't consider themselves. They don't consider Blacks in Brazil. They don't consider them as Black as they are. They don't consider um, people from Africa that are Black. They don't even consider them Black. It's like you were saying before. There's almost this like ownership from within. Like I have to claim how powerful I am as a Black person. I see a lot of that, but I also see people who are trying to learn and figure it out too. I do see people trying to retrieve these historical pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that have been fragmented because of the Middle Passage, because of Jim Crow era, because of Reconstruction, or before any of this happened at all. Like you said, you maybe the people in Cameroon don't know what the slave experience was here, but you had to deal with other colonial infrastructural measures.
Mhm.
And you know, we had to deal with it in a different way too. And I think that's where I like to see it as like wherever I go in the world, I feel a special connection to other Black people. My wife is a white woman, but she's pointed this out several times how Blacks have a special connection wherever you go. And I do believe that. Wherever I go in the world, I get excited when I see other Black people. When you came to UT, when I first met you, I was so excited when I saw you. There's like I don't know if there should always be a connection like that, but it just for me, it's always been like that. It's like, okay, I see another Black person.
Yeah,
I'm
but
just automatically so excited, you know?
Kiko, sorry to stop you, but at the same time, at UT, and we talk about, there were an African who come into the department, and I asked him to have a coffee with me or drink. He was so distant.
Wow, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Maybe
I
you
remember
forgot
you
that.
telling me that.
Yes, that's how it is. That's how it is.
Is that because of is that a status thing? Because you made a comment earlier about there seems to be a perception that it's so weird, like you said, Africans can't be around each other. There's that sort of a mentality, but then there's also a mentality that we are African, but we don't want to be viewed as African Americans from the United States.
Yeah, it's true that we can go. It's really deeper than that. But uh, because as a Cameroonian, when I see another Cameroonian, we know each other. We have our own problem, but it become an issue with all the Africans. What if I see an African? Most of the not all of them. I'm not and to be and also I want to mention that I'm not talking about all the African, but I just talk about the general feeling. When an African meet another African, sometime there is a problem. And I was talking with about that the mentor of mine, and she told me that she doesn't feel welcome among African, about Black women in Maine at that time. Why? Is it because she was professor and the other were not professor? I don't know. But there are so many things, and I think we can connect that with colonization. I used to say that colonization was a success. It was a terrible success because yes, yeah,
Yeah, I
because
think no, I was going to say that I think it comes back to like a certain level of ignorance, but
that's why I point colonization.
because ignorance is not only you can be ignorant not only because you don't want to consider the other point of view, but because even if you have reached a point to where you're open to another point of view, you still you ridicule it, like or you don't. It's like you understand it because you've been exposed to it, but you choose to not acknowledge it any more than you have to, based on whatever setting you're in. Whether you're in the university, you may act a different way, and you have the same information, but when you go home, you have a different point of view about it. I think there's a lot of that going on, like a lot of the cultural switching. I thought about Amy Césaire um,
Yes,
when you were writing your dissertation, and you mentioned Amy Césaire, and I thought about that too. That whole idea of people in Martinique, people in Guadeloupe, people uh, in South America who come from the French departments. Do those people a lot of times, because they're technically French, right?
yes, the
And so,
French citizen.
so technically France, even though on the map it says Martinique, Guadeloupe, and you're saying to yourself,
Yeah, yes.
but France, that's France though, right?
Oh, yes. And also, yes, it's really deeper because when you bring that, when they are in France also, it looks like there's also a malaise between those French citizens from the Caribbean, from Martinique, Guadeloupe, and the African.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a documentary that I'm using in my African diaspora class. A woman from Martinique said that she mentioned the fact that before coming to France, before coming to France, she didn't know that she was from Africa. She thought that her ancestors were white, and by miracle, they turned she was black. I was surprised to read. I was surprised to hear that. But
Mm-hmm.
and when she mentioned that, yeah, in France also we have that malaise, and that's why I say that sometimes, and it's really difficult. It's it's difficult to just be black sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
It's really difficult. And when you read those novels, when you just study those people, you understand. Sometimes you feel really bad, and you understand that we have a lot of job to do. You
Mm-hmm.
mentioned ignorance. Ignorance is play a play a huge part of that. Ignorance. But
Mm-hmm.
ignorance, yes, they are ignorance. And
I was thinking about this. I think it still goes back to the superiority aspect of it. Like each person, depending on which space they're in, have this sense of superiority, even within the marginalized groups. And I think that goes back. It's another colonial mindset because we know even in our departments we have the Hispanophone and the Francophone, Lusophone, Anglophone, and that's a perception even in these same foreign language departments that we're in. It wasn't long ago that people said that you couldn't, or it wasn't as acceptable to include something outside, like if Spanish was your department, well, you can't include stuff from Haiti, you can't include stuff from Portugal or anything like that because that's not the same language. But that's discounting the cultural connections between Haiti and the Dominican Republic, Haiti and Cuba. You can't just make it based on language because Black culture transcends language. And so that's why these departments now are being more receptive to interdisciplinary. It's actually, if anything, now interdisciplinary is more desired and preferred because everyone thinks it's so cool now to be like, oh, I'm doing something that's interdisciplinary, that's Black, Haiti, and this and that. It's almost become a trend. But if you go back 20 years ago, people were not really encouraging you to be like, no, you should do Haiti, you should do Peru, you should do that. They used to compartmentalize it as you have to stick to Cuba, Puerto Rico over here, and Haitians belong over there, and those types of people belong over there. Even though they're Black, they're different. And you can't really do that based on what we're trying to do. The work we're doing transcends geographic boundaries and cultures and languages. You have to see it as a whole and sort of analyze it within the whole, like you did in your dissertation.
Yes, yes, that's true. And also, I think you mentioned ignorance, I think is something that you need to take into account. And to be honest, African do as African, I don't really know my story. I say as African. If I tell you that 10 years ago, I didn't know anything about Haiti except the name of Toussaint Louverture. Yes, and even now in Africa, people don't know why Haiti is so poor. People don't know anything about the double debt. People don't know anything about that. I'm sure that even some African professors don't know anything about that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing with Africa. You know, when I was in high school, I used to learn anything about the US, France, and the last chapter were about Cameroon. And the professor didn't reach that point. That's why sometimes a student complete the high school without learning about Cameroon or about his country, about Africa. And if you don't know, if you don't learn about Africa, if you don't learn about other African or of African diaspora, you will not see another Black like you or like your brother, like someone like you. And that's why we always seen people from Black from Brazil. They are too distant. They are not us. African American, no, that those are African American. African from Peru, no, they are not African. That's why we have all
Mm-hmm.
this. And I think that sometimes it's come from Africans because Black in America, they remember African, even if it's the impossible Africa, the mythical Africa. They remember that they came from Africa. I
Mm-hmm.
think maybe it can explain why Africans seen the Black from the diaspora differently. Maybe this can explain why we have those méfiance
Mm-hmm.
among each other.
But
Maybe.
but even the diasporic Africans are um, we have these perceptions too. I'm not saying me personally, but
Yeah.
I've always tried to see Africa as a whole, including the diaspora. That's the way I've always tried to. That's what I try to promote.
Yes.
But even within these diasporic communities, there's always this. It's almost a litmus test.
Question? Yeah.
There's a litmus test of where you have to like Blacks now, and it's like some of the people that I talk to now, they're not convinced that Black Cubans are Black. It's like they would never be Black enough for them
Oh.
because they're so invested in their own identities and their own experiences. They don't see it as possible that a Black person in Cuba can understand what I've gone through, but they have. And it's the same thing. The same playbook happens depending on whatever space you're in. The Black Cuban is saying the same thing. How can these Black people in New Jersey or in San Antonio, Texas, or in Paris, France, or in Douala, Cameroon, like how can these people understand me? It's because we've been separated like this throughout time and space. And I think it's because there hasn't been efforts. The efforts to divide us have been stronger than the efforts to bring us together. I think that's what it is. And I don't think we do a good enough job as people to sort of learn from each other because we're always so concerned about is it's not global enough. Is everything's about local, local, local. Local can only take you so far. You have to have a global perspective too. And I think that's why a lot of my friends are they kind of get stuck in this political like it's almost a numbness because it's like they start talking to me about politics, and even though we have a lot of the same views, they only look from within the United States. They don't see how the United States connects to the rest of the world and how the stuff that happens here affects everybody else and vice versa. And so it's like to me, that's always going to limit you, and it's always going to limit your politics because you're only seeing it. You have a limit to what you're understanding because you
Yes.
won't break down the ceiling, you won't break down the screen to try to understand the other groups involved.
Okay. I see. Yeah,
But
it's interesting.
I do have I had a few more minutes before we conclude because I actually got places to go. I know you probably do too. But
Okay.
I'm curious about when you were living in Cameroon, what is the perception of the world in Cameroon as far as like what is on your television programming that forms your mentality about the rest of the world around you? Like, what kind of news do you get over there? And what types of relationships do you have with countries um, outside of this US, Western Europe alliance?
Yes. In Cameroon, okay, before the 19th, before the end of the 19th, we were not open. Anyway, we didn't have cable, we didn't have TV. We only watched national television. And I remember it was only at the end of the news that we had some news from all over from the rest of the world. That and at that time, as kids, I will say I didn't have any idea about what was going on outside the world, outside Cameroon. And with after the 19 in the year 2000, when everybody was able to have a television, and when we have the cable, and until now, a Cameroonian is more aware of what is going on outside than what is going on in the same city. We will say it's the same thing here. Yeah, but
Mm-hmm.
it's it's more. I think for the Cameroonian is they are much aware about what's going on outside because first there is not many opportunities in Cameroon, and everybody, I will say, everybody want to get out of Cameroon.
Mm.
Yes, they think that everything that's good is outside. Everything that is perfect, it's out of the country. We have those economical problems. We have the problem with the human rights. We have problem with that war that is that's happening since 2016 in the Anglophone part, and we have the insecurity in the north part with Boko Haram, this insecurity in the east part with the with the terrorists from Central African Republic. It was not like this before, but right now in Cameroon, people feel insecure. And recently, a journalist was abducted and he was killed 5 days after, and he was brutally killed. They cut his finger, he was mutilated, and so until now, we had few people that was arrested, but we don't know exactly who give the order because it go into a some people mention the Ministry of the Justice. You see, they feel insecure. And also, and the relationship right now between Cameroon and the other country, I will say it's the same relationship between each African country and the country and the country the neighbor or the country that is in Africa. I am sure that you heard like recently that some African was expelled from South Africa. It's the same thing in Cameroon. We had people who were expelled from Equatorial Guinea, which is close to us. Some were expelled from Gabon, and it's the same thing. You see, people don't want, as Professor Bembe said, people don't want African in Europe, but in Africa, we don't want ourselves.
Wow.
That's how life goes in Africa. And I don't know how it will end, but it has something to do with the human rights. People are not free to talk. People feel insecure. People don't have enough to eat. I think it's simple as that. They don't have enough to eat. Because I left my country because I didn't have enough money to live decently. I was civil servant. I had a job, but I couldn't live. Because when you have your salary, so many people rely on you. And that's why life become impossible. Everybody want to get out of the country.
And from your vantage point, the number one, what's the first destination that people think of? France?
France, it becomes difficult to go to France, but they go to France. But people right now, a lot of people go to Canada because with the Canada immigration, many people who got many college graduate, they go to Canada because it's so easy to get there. They already have a job in Cameroon. They have some skills and they go there. But even in Europe, I think 2 years ago, a research pointed the fact that in Germany, there were more Cameroonian doctors than in Cameroon. And I think it's the same case in France. I will say Germany, but I'm sure we have more Cameroonian in France. But recently we have more of them go to Germany, to Belgium. You know, Belgium people speak French, and Canada also because they speak French there. We have many Cameroonian there. I don't have the exact number because I didn't look into that scholar. But because I see people travel, people go out of the country, Germany, and before the COVID, of course, they go to Germany, and recently Canada.
But I guess you've answered pretty much all the questions I had. I had a whole list of questions here, and I think we had a great conversation. I'm going to listen to it again, and I'm going to probably have more questions.
Absolutely.
I definitely learned a lot, though. I learned so much. We'd be glad to have you back down the road for sure, just to open the discussion up even more. I think because the point of this pod is we do a lot of politics on here, but we do culture as well. I think the two really go good together. And I think understanding both can kind of enrich people's experiences more as far as understanding humanity a little bit more. And that's what we want to do. We want to promote education on this pod and not simply overreactions, because I could easily create a platform and put a shiny object in front of the camera and get 1 million people to watch it, you know? And then you have your subscribers go up to 1 million people, which I think it happens too often. I don't think people want to take the time to start from the ground up and educate people. And that's what I want to do here. I want people to actually talk to each other, learn from each other, and maybe we can build networks to where we can have a world that we can envision where we feel comfortable and we feel like education is valued and not so much driven by headlines and driven by the newest cool object that's going to finally die in style and fashion. But we need something that's consistent to where people are constantly learning. I feel like the stuff on television now and even the stuff on the radio and everything else is just it's so dumbed down to where people can't learn if they want to. They just it's all it does is just reinforces what they already felt that they knew before. It doesn't challenge them. And I want this podcast to challenge people. And I wanted to challenge even my own views because I'm learning from the guests each day. I'm learning from everyone I talk to. And so that's the whole point, is to learn from each other and stop judging people so much and actually try to understand, you know, people that you're around. Like that's the whole point.
Yes.
But I thank you, Gerard, again, Dr. Keubeung. And if an audience member had a question for you directly, or if they wanted to get in touch with you, how would they be able to do that?
Oh, okay, you have my contacts.
Yes,
Kiko. I
okay.
will be glad to talk, to discuss, and to learn from, you know, when you discuss with someone, you always learn, and we always learn. I will be glad to discuss with anybody and or to chat with him or her. There's
Yeah,
no
I have your information. I'll link it in the description. Your McDaniel
yes.
information. Check out Gerard's work. I know some of y'all don't speak French, but I think this information that you learned about today will be of value to a lot of people. And I'll be awaiting the book that you publish down the road. I know people are going to ask me the same thing. Kiko, when are you going to publish your book? Because I've already gotten pressure from people to publish this book, my dissertation, into a book. I just have to find the time to write. You know, it's hard to find the time,
Yes, that's
the
true.
brain space, right?
That's true. It's hard to find the time.
But beautiful people, this was an excellent episode 32. And I can't wait to talk to you down the road, Gerard. I'm pretty sure that there's going to be some other stuff that comes up to where we revisit this conversation and we expand on this conversation. But I thank you for your time and have a wonderful day, beautiful people. And cheers.
Okay. Thank you, Kiko. Be safe.